All right, right now we're going to bring on John from Digital Acquisitions. We're going to change gears here, going from security to how do we position our company for potential exit? What are some of the mistakes we make as we grow our business that might cost us when we turn towards exit? And how do we maybe get the most value out of it? And I know a lot of people aren't going to be thinking, well, today I'm trying to sell my company today or tomorrow, but I think this is something that can be applied today that will help you at the end, at the day that you're ready to sell, grow, merge, or go on. And John gave me a lot of advice on buying an e-commerce store, and I'm still on the market looking for a few opportunities myself with a few partners of mine. But so I love this type of session. John, I'll let you talk. This is John from Digital Acquisitions, everybody.
All right, Derek, thank you for the invite. So yeah, today we're going to talk about how to position your e-commerce business to sell. And I think you made a great point right there to get this kicked off, is that you shouldn't be thinking about this like when you want to sell. There are plenty of things you can start doing right now, today, to start prep your business for sale. And I think what you'll learn throughout this presentation is it goes to being proactive. The more proactive and the more you work on your business, there are inherent ways to reduce risk in your business and drive value for another buyer down the road. And these things we can start working on today. And that's what we're going to get into with the presentation. So just give me a second here to share my screen. So for the purposes of this presentation, though, what I'd like to invite everybody to do is think like you're a buyer right now. You're going to go out, you're going to go buy an e-commerce business. My question to you is what is your biggest concern, right? Like if you're thinking about this today, you're browsing, I don't know, whatever website, BizBuySell, and you see an e-commerce business, what's the most pressing concern? Are we able to poll the audience right now, Derek?
I can, if you just, yeah, you can ping us in chat with with what you believe is the biggest concern. Hit us, Clayton, Brett, Armands, Harris, Rosie, Sophia, hit us up with your biggest concern.
Yeah, so curious to hear what people have to say. My thing is, if I'm going to buy a business, how can you ensure to me that that business is going to continue operating as is when I take it over, right? When you buy a business, you're buying a machine that generates revenues and profits. So how can I know that that machine is going to continue churning and operating as is? So just to kick this off too as well, I wanted everybody to understand that when you go to do a deal, when you sell a business, there's really two major components, okay? Number one is the price. So your business sells for $1 million or whatever that is. And then there's also the terms, okay? And so terms, that's usually around, okay, how much money do I get up front? How much money comes down the road? Typically for a smaller e-commerce business, you're gonna get 70, 80% of the money up front. You're gonna get 20% down the road. But what I want everybody to understand is that for you to get better deals, better price, and better terms, it's all about reducing risk for another buyer and maximizing value for another buyer. So we're going to actually break this presentation up into those two high-level categories, which is reducing the risk, maximizing the value. So to start, what are the major risks in an e-commerce business? Number one, your supply chain, your sourcing, your logistics. Number two, acquiring those customers. And then these third, fourth, and fifth points, I'm going to go into just here briefly. So I love that chat that you just had with Mike, Derek, about protecting privacy, consumer privacy, right? These 3 points, you know, protecting consumer data, all these new privacy issues that seem to all start in Europe and now they're making their way here to North America. And then I think as well, there's a lot of more taxation challenges coming on with e-commerce stores, right? Should these goods be taxed or not? This is a big argument with Amazon. Having secure payment processing as well. You hear all these horror stories with Stripe and PayPal upholding payments. And not only that, I've read case studies of where store owners, they actually, what happened? They were double charging people. I've seen that before. And then, of course, you've got your intellectual property, your brand. How do you protect that? And so why I'm just briefly touching on points 3 through 5 here is that these are like deal breakers, right? If you're not protecting your consumers, your customers, if you're not doing, filing your taxes, or you're not protecting your brand, nobody's going to buy your store. These are like automatic deal breakers. So you need to focus on these particular risks, how to set up systems, processes to protect yourself from any of these issues at all times. If I'm a buyer and you can prove to me that these things are just operating and there's no issues because you've got those systems in place, then I'm going to be pretty happy. So let's go ahead into supply chain, because I think this is something we talked about, Derek, right? When we were talking about that store you wanted to buy. How do you minimize that risk in the supply chain? So if you're in e-commerce, you're either manufacturing the goods yourself, or you're working with a contract manufacturer and you're purchasing your goods. So manufacturing, inherently, you're going to have a better valuation with that because you have more control over that, right? Regardless, so your purchasing is going involved when it comes to sourcing. You're either, if you're manufacturing, you're purchasing your raw materials, those items that go in your BOM, or if you're purchasing from a contractor, right? How do we protect that? So having signed an exclusive contracts, that's certainly one way. I hear all the time about people buying goods from contract manufacturers overseas, and those manufacturers just turn around and sell those same goods to other people, right? Especially on Amazon, you hear all the time about products getting jacked. So you got to think about that in terms of a buyer. How can having contracts is good. But I think going beyond that, with having backup suppliers or dual suppliers, right? Can you interchange the goods that you need to fulfill your customers? When I was in manufacturing, I had backup raw material suppliers for everything so that I could interchange those goods at any time. That helped protect me from price increases and also from supply chain disruptions. And there's a lot, I think, right now in the world, and especially with the US, we got so many issues going on with supply chain, not just supply chain, but more the tariffs and the negotiations, like all these trade wars we keep hearing about in the news. So again, backups of everything. And that even extends into your warehousing and logistics, your fulfillment, right? The other half of your supply chain. So what can you do there? It's same thing, just having those backups ready to go. If you do the fulfillment by yourself, that's going to be more valuable to a buyer. But again, I like to see that you have that backup, because a buyer might come in, you might be doing fulfillment yourself right now, but when a buyer comes in, he might not like that. He might want to move like automatically to a 3PL. So having that ready to go for him, I think will help with the transfer of your business. And then also, I'm always curious to know if you're shipping internationally. Like, do you have logistic companies helping you for international versus domestic, right? And then the other thing is returns. This is part of the game nowadays. When you do e-commerce, you're going to get returns. So how are you fulfilling that? How are you automating that? How are you making sure that you're not spoiling anything, right? Is it possible to take in some of your returns and repurpose them and send them back up? So having, again, systems, backups for all these things are very helpful to minimize risks in your supply chain. Next big risk to me is customer acquisition. And this is something I really like to dive into when I'm evaluating a business. So number one, you've got so many, in e-commerce, you've got so many distribution channels, right? You've got your website, Amazon, Walmart, Wayfair, eBay, the list goes on and on. But if you look at every single one of those channels, inherently there's a risk in each one of them, right? So for example, your website, like with your website, your one Google algorithm change from not being found, right? With Amazon, they say you don't even own your business. And so the key to minimizing risk there, I think if you can be on multiple distribution channels and have a good diversification of your sales through those channels, that's going to be more valuable. That's going to be less riskier, right? Don't put all your eggs in one basket. And you'll see that in the multiples in the marketplace. Like for example, a straight Amazon FBA store is typically going to start around that 2.5 times seller's discretionary earnings. That'll be the price you'll earn in the market. But if you do Amazon and your website and it's a good blend of 50-50, now you're going to probably start at a 3. So that potentially could be a lot of money. And why you're getting that better valuation, again, you're minimizing the risk by going through multiple channels. And then coupled with that is your acquisition channels. One thing that drives me crazy when I work with e-commerce companies is that I get all these people come to me and they're like, they've got a great store, but they're doing like 100% paid acquisition through like Google. They do nothing but Google and Facebook ads. And I'm like, dude, your store is not really worth much. In fact, I'm not even getting involved because that is so risky. And if you think about it, what's the risk? Again, if we go through every one of these acquisition channels, there's inherent risks with each of them. So paid, number one, there's no guarantee that a buyer can do paid acquisition as good as you, right? There's sort of an art to doing that and being good. Definitely takes experience to drive down costs. The other big risk with paid is that the cost, Facebook ads, Google ads, those cost per clicks and whatnot, they're always on the rise. And so that's why you need to diversify with email. But we look at email, right? There's some risks there, right? With deliverability. If you don't do that right, your emails are not going to hit those customers' mailboxes and you're not going to get sales. And you go to organic, SEO, social. Again, algorithmic changes can affect your traffic. Influencer, what's the risk there? It's hard, from what I understand, it's very hard to find a solid influencer that is going to drive a really strong ROI for you, right? You typically got to play around and work with a bunch before you find a good one. And then affiliate, of course, affiliates can be very flaky, right? You could sign up 100 and none of them drive any paid acquisition for you. So again here, the more distribution channels you're working on and driving sales through, the more acquisition channels. I never want to see, again, that 50% of sales coming through one of these acquisition channels. So again, more diversification, the more risk, more minimization of risk, the more the buyer is going to be happy. And so now let's shift to the second area, which is now maximizing value. And so this is really, these are the things you can start working on today, Derek, that are going to help drive return when you go to sell down the road, whether that's 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from the road. Maximizing value in these areas of focus is going to help you get better multiples, better sales price. It's going to drive greater interest into your store because ultimately you want as many hungry buyers as possible to bid up the price of the store and the terms, get you a better deal. And this is also going to help you transfer the business. If you want to transfer your business and get out, it really boils down to the systems and processes you have. The more a buyer can rely on the team that's in place and for all the operations, then, they're not going to need you as the seller. So let's go into these one by one. So financial performance and KPIs. When your store, growth is probably, from what I've seen in my experience, probably has the most heaviest influence on the multiple that your store earns when you go to sell. And why that is number one, people are attracted to things that are growing because they think it can continue growing. And when they see a store growing, they're thinking ROI, right? So that's number one. Number two, you're always going to get measured. Your valuation for any business is going to be measured on the past 3 years of financial performance. So if you've got 3 years of solid growth, 10, 15, 20, 50%, that's going to weigh heavily and give you a better multiple versus if you've lost 30% of revenue over the past 3 years. And what I think people should understand right now is growth. It's just not your revenue. It's not your EBITDA, right? And this is really where you can drive value. And let's get into some of these KPIs. A lot of these KPIs I threw out here are just financial KPIs, right? Your acquisition cost, your lifetime value. I like to see that per channel, per acquisition channel, and even per distribution channel. And then, summarizing that all into your overall acquisition costs and lifetime values. But having those repeat customers, order frequency, showing you're driving your average order value up over time, that you're bringing in more customers, you're driving your conversion rates down. So I think you get the message, right? You can there's so much you can measure in an e-commerce store, and it's pretty easy, right? Because you've got that data coming into your platform. You've got it connected to your QuickBooks. It's not that hard, and I'm sure there are some apps that can probably track a lot of these things. I mean, I know Shopify by itself tracks a lot of these things. So one tip I have for everybody is no buyer is ever going to look at you and say, Derek, you're tracking way too many KPIs, right? That's never going to happen. And understand that when you sell your business, like you have to market your business and make it look attractive, right? So if you only have a few KPIs to show a buyer, that's not as sexy as when you have all these KPIs that you've been tracking over the past few years and you've been showing how you've been steadily improving in each one of these areas, right? So get as many KPIs that are as relevant to you, and don't limit it just to finance, right? You can have operational KPIs. You can have KPIs around your warehousing, your logistics, right? How your orders going out on time, things like that. And what I like to do for anything I track, whether it's KPIs, revenue, I always like to do rolling 12-month averages. And I think this is something everybody should look into. And why you want to do that is because it normalizes the data. Okay, most e-commerce stores, you've got that seasonality, right? You got a whole lot of sales coming at the end of the year in Q4. But if you're looking at things on a rolling 12-month average, that takes out the seasonality and really shows if you truly are increasing the performance in all those areas you're measuring. So now let's talk about recurring revenue, because inherently this is more valuable. When you compare, the valuations of a SaaS company versus an e-commerce, SaaS naturally get better multiples and better dollars. And it's because of that recurring revenue, right? And where does that happen in e-commerce? It's with these subscription businesses. So if you can incorporate some sort of subscription into your business, that's great. I mean, a great example is Dollar Shave Club, right? That subscription aspect of that business is what drove it to that billion-dollar valuation. Now, not everybody can have a subscription business depending on what you're selling, but not to say that you can't focus on metrics that support repeat business, right? And there's other strategies you can employ, right? Like adding the new products, new versions of products, anything to go back to that customer base that has bought previously and drive business over and over, frequency. I mean, these things will help. And again, they're attractive to a buyer coming in. All right, so this point is extremely critical. And this is something anybody can start doing in any business. It doesn't matter if it's e-commerce, SaaS, agencies, brick and mortar, manufacturing. This might be one of the most important principles when it comes to valuation, and that's called the Switzerland structure. So your business should not rely on any single customer, employee, or vendor. So when it comes to e-commerce, really we're focusing on vendors and employees. Customers, you're going to have lots of customers, so not really a big concern there. But when it comes to vendors, we talked about vendors previously, about supply, when, that really centers around your supply chain. So let's talk about mitigating the risk of employees, right? The way to do that is just by incorporating systems. So number one, a good pointer, anything that you do twice in your business should be documented. And you should be working towards having operations manuals that detail everything that goes on in your business. Even simple things like flow charts and taking screenshots of how to do various aspects of your business can be very appealing to a buyer. And this, again, this is going to really help transfer your business to that other buyer and get you out of it after the sale. And of course, incorporating automation in any way possible is going to help. The other thing I wanted to mention about systems, this can really help drive down your costs when you're bringing on new employees, you're onboarding, and ultimately that can help you scale faster. So this is something I encourage everybody to start focusing on today. You don't need money to do this. You can build simple manuals with a Microsoft Word document, and trust me that a buyer is going to love that you have these things, because to be quite honest, most people, even when for smaller stores, most people don't have these things. But another point I want to make is that as you scale up and you get into bigger deal sizes, when you get over to about $1 million of EBITDA per year in your business, that's when you're going to start courting those private equity firms, those bigger holding companies, bigger competitors. And I can promise you, if you don't have these structures and systems in place, like, they're not going to deal with you, because private equity firms, they don't, when they buy businesses, they don't get involved in the day-to-day. They don't want to do that. They want to see that there's a system that they can just get in, influence with their strategy, connections, money, etc., and just help drive the strategy and the vision. But they want that structure with the employees to really help grow the business. So with all that said, I want to get now into a little case study. So I'm going to have to get really vulnerable here for the audience, because I've been trying to sell a e-commerce store here for about 7 months now. And when we took this store on, we felt like there was enough there. We definitely knew this was going to be a battle. But as we got into it deeper and deeper, we kept finding out more and more information that just did not help us, did not help the seller. So I'm just going to give you a few brief points. I want to keep this confidential, so I'm not going to give too much information. But this e-commerce store is actually 18 years old. It's so old that they were using Vvay, which I've never even heard of this shopping cart platform before. So right there, that's a great selling point. 18 years old. I've never, most e-commerce companies are not 18 years old. Usually what you find in the marketplace is like 4 to 5 years old. But that's a great point. There's some inherent brand value there. So that's a great point starting out with this company. Then, we learned that sales were coming through a blended distribution channel, 60% through his website, 40% through Amazon. So that's awesome right there. Then we learned it's a husband and wife, and they knew everything. They did everything in the business. All the knowledge was parked up in their heads. Not a good thing, right? And now, so we were talking about value and whatnot. And so let's get into the financial performance. This company peaked at about 1.5 million in 2016. And so they've now, in the trailing 12 months, last 12 months, their revenues it's right above $1 million. So they've lost about 35% of their revenue over the last 3 years, which is not good. And then, very little systems, processes, KPI tracking. That Vvay platform being so old, it just had like sales reports. That was it. Amazon, we could get good reporting out of Amazon, and they were doing a little advertising on Amazon. So good reporting there, but still it's an incomplete picture. So for a buyer coming in and really assessing the store is difficult. And so where we're at with the store right now is that it's been 7 months and we have been unable to sell the store. And let me skip right now to point 2. Because of that poor financial performance, no bank would finance this deal. And this is what prevented us from really getting this owner an exit. So let me tell you all about the market right now with lenders. SBA loans, by the way, are a great way to buy a business because you can put as little as 10% down. But a lot of the lenders out there right now, more and more getting into e-commerce and Amazon stores, but their risk tolerance has gone down considerably over the last few years. A lot of them got in this like in the last 10 years, and a lot of them have just got burnt on deals. And so with that risk tolerance going down, like unless your store is trending in the right direction, they're not going to finance it, right? Because they want to see that upward trend, because then they can make projections and feel more confident about getting their return on the loan. So that really hurt us here. I talked to so many lenders and we could not get this deal financed. So you got to consider, if your business, if it's going to sell under $2 million, there's a very high likelihood somebody, if you're doing this in the USA, that is going to buy your business with an SBA loan. So keep that in mind. Another good point I want to make to everybody is that a buyer, when they come in, they want to understand why, they want to understand your performance metrics, why it's going up or why it's going down. So in this case, the buyers, he had an excuse I won't get into, but I think the point I want to make is when you're losing revenue, no buyer will give two shits why. They're going to look at that negatively, and it's unattractive because they're looking again at your business like, okay, this is losing revenue. Why? Regardless, it's a risk. You're increasing risk with that decrease in revenue. So yeah, this goes back again to value. Financial performance is critical. Here's another little takeaway. Do not do your own accounting. So this seller did his own accounting. So we had an initial buyer. He came in, he started doing due diligence. And once he found this out, he was out the door fast. And the reason why is that without a third-party verification, it's like you can't trust somebody, especially on a transaction, when you're going to put up a few $100,000, maybe $1 million or more. Like there's got to be that third-party verification. And this buyer, he wasn't accusing the seller of anything, but he was like, how can I trust this guy, right? And to complicate the matters, he was commingling funds under one entity. So this gentleman actually owns two e-commerce stores. So he owns an LLC, and under the LLC, he's got e-commerce store A, which he's selling, and e-commerce store B. So think about that. When the buyer comes in, they want to see the tax returns of that parent company. But there was no way for us to go in and verify in those tax returns what belonged to store A or store B, right? So a better structure is that, if you get serious with the store, any store should be its own LLC or whatever, when you talk to your accountant, whatever sort of legal structure you want to employ. That way you're keeping everything separated. You should have separate bank accounts, separate payment processing. All that needs to be separated because if a buyer can't discern, a buyer's not going to want to go through and try to pick apart P&Ls and discern which is, what revenue is going to this store and what revenue is going to the other store. That's just, it's messy, it's sloppy, and so don't do it because that can literally cost you a sale, which it did here. So let's talk about selling e-commerce the right way. I want to make some key takeaways for everybody here to wrap this up. Number one, timing is super critical. So when you've got that 3 years of solid growth, that's the time you should be looking to sell the business, not when you have 3 years of negative growth. It's going to be much harder. Additionally, selling in Q3 or Q4 can be very challenging for an e-commerce business, especially if you do big sales around Black Friday, Cyber Monday, through the Christmas season. And if you think about that, trying to transfer business at that time where I've seen a lot of e-commerce companies, 40, 50% of their revenue can come in Q4. So that's not the time to transfer a business. Not to say that there aren't e-commerce businesses that have steady revenue throughout the year. If you're one of those, then I don't think there's, timing wise, it's not as important. But if you do have a big chunk of sales at the end of the year, wait until like February, once you've compiled all your revenue and taxes for the previous year. I think that's the perfect time to get in. Now, and I touched upon this for this next point. When you start getting into $1 million EBITDA plus, you really got to focus on exit planning. And a lot of those things I was talking about, maximizing value, that's what an exit planner does. They get into depth about your systems, your processes, your accounting, and really just assessing where you're weak. Because when you go to that next level of buyers, they get more sophisticated. They're going to want to see more information. And ultimately, if you don't have those systems, they're not going to be interested, right? So as you go up that scale, these value drivers, they become even more important. So you can start exit planning today. You do not need to wait until you're going to exit. I think to build a really good exit plan, you need to give yourself a year minimum, more like 18 to 24 months. And so ultimately too, where you want to drive your business, guys, is that you should be working on the business, not in the business. The more you're working in it, again, you're going to have to put more time into transferring the business. I think the ideal state or the ideal vision where you want to reach is where you're just driving the strategy and you've got that chain of command underneath you that is just executing your vision and taking care of all the operations, all that in the business type work. And so I'll leave you with my ultimate litmus test. If you're a store owner, can you walk away from your business today, not tell anybody, and the business will still thrive, continue operating for an extended period of time? If you can get there, I promise you've got, the only way you're going to get there is by having all those systems and processes in place. And that ultimately is going to be very valuable for some buyer out there. So that's it for the presentation. I hope you guys enjoyed. I just wanted to mention I am working with a really top-notch exit planner over at Final Ascent. This gentleman's name is Steve Conwell. So if anybody would like to do a free value assessment on their business, I chopped it up into that bit.ly link right there. It's just Biz Value Assessment. You'll get a free report, and if you're really a self-starter, you can work on these things on your own. If not, Steve and I can jump on the horn with you and discuss what it looks like to go through a real exit planning engagement.
Hey, Daddy.
Awesome. John, thank you so much. I hear somebody in the background.
Yes, the family is on.
Yeah, I was just typing in here for people to get a hold of you in chat, and I'll make sure and share that in the show notes.